All right, looks like people are filing in. So good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Melissa Munier, and I'm with Engage to Excel, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar, Balancing and Navigating Growth, the Talent Angle. I'm also joined by our presenters, Darren Findley, President of Recruitment Solutions at Engage to Excel, and our guest speaker, Arko Basak, from Vice President at Everest Group. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here today.
Thanks, Melissa, for welcoming me over here. I'm Arko. As Melissa mentioned, I'm a Vice President in Everest Group, and in that capacity, I lead our advisory and research related to talent and HR services and technology. Very specifically, I focus on the RPO and MSP industries, and I've been in this industry for almost 10 years now. Darren?
Thanks, Arko, and good morning and good evening, everyone. Like Arko said, Melissa, I'm Darren Findley. I live just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and I have been doing some form of recruiting since 1982, which is kind of insane. I thought about that last night as I was thinking about my intro this morning. So, but the one constant since 1982 for me is I love helping candidates, really find the right role. But I really love helping companies, think about and create business impact through their talent. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So in my role with Engage to Excel as President of Recruitment Solutions, I get to kind of craft those unique solutions every single day and then help support, our customers around the talent that they need to bring on, how they do that, and how they can make business impact across their organization. So I'm excited to be here today with Arko to discuss the talent angle. So Arko?
Before Arko speaks, thank you both again. I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Everybody is on mute, but we do encourage you to ask questions. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Once we've concluded the presentation, we will have a Q&A portion and do our best to answer everyone's questions. But should we not have enough time, we will answer them personally via email. Also, the webinar is being recorded, and we will provide everyone access to the recording via email in probably about 3 business days. And then lastly, before we get started, I just want to say thank you to our clients that have joined from Engage to Excel. We do appreciate your business and partnership and happy to have you here with us today. So, all right, let's get started. Arko, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Darren. So today, what we will discuss is, the impact that COVID-19 has had on various organizations. But more importantly, now that we are slowly reaching towards the end of COVID-19, vaccinations are coming in. How do organizations, how do enterprise manage that change and that growth back to normal days? And what is the role of talent acquisition over there? So we'll talk about that, and then we'll deep dive into what are some of the potential solutions that can help enterprises and organizations navigate these talent challenges in the post-pandemic world. And last, but not the least, we'll talk about how can an outsourcing sort of relationship help in achieving a better talent acquisition solution. And as Melissa mentioned, we'll have Q&A at the end. With that, I'll hand over to Darren in terms of why we are doing this and setting up the context.
Yeah, thanks, Arko. It's been a challenging year, and I think going into 2021 will continue to be challenging, maybe scary, but it'll certainly be competitive in our world over the next 18 months when it comes to talent. And whether you're a CHRO or a SVP of HR or talent or managing a talent acquisition function, your most important purpose right now is to equip your company, not just to survive, but to win through talent. So let's kind of take a quick review of the labor market, and I'll apologize to those of you that don't know me. I am a labor market data junkie, and it has become a hobby, I guess, of mine over the last several years as I continue to read and think about the micro and macroeconomics of labor market supply and demand. But think back with me just for a second to early 2020, just before the first patient was diagnosed with COVID. women had crossed a major employment milestone. And for the first time, the labor market was really booming. Healthcare and education and other service sectors are largely staffed by female workers. And we were racing to hire more and more people. And for just a few shining moments there in early 2020, the government data showed that women actually outnumbered men for the first time in the U.S. workforce. And so it was all really kind of a crescendo of work in the workplace, a crescendo of participation in the workplace, and then kind of the whole house burned down, with COVID. And so it's been a tough year. We've seen the recovery start, but the road ahead is sometimes uncertain when we think about the vaccine and other waves of the mutated virus that are coming in, and that always kind of creates some uncertainty. But if you look at the labor market today, I'm going to give you the bad news and the good news, just so you know. The labor market today is really not in good shape. COVID basically threw an explosive right in the middle of it, and there are pieces of it kind of scattered all around, and it's just not simple anymore. The macro and microeconomic forces that are still impacting each industry kind of in a different way, and to a certain degree, certain job families are impacted dramatically different than others are, and some are still intact and doing okay. It's been a mixed recovery, that's for sure. But overall in the labor market, when you look at it, the labor force has shrunk by about 1.9% since this time last year. So that means there are 6.2 fewer people in the workforce looking for work than there were before. And the majority of that loss has been women and minorities leaving the labor force. And in September last year alone, we saw over 800,000 females drop out of the workforce. And that was 4 times the rate of men dropping out of the workforce, largely driven by school closures and lack of childcare. So that continued, loss really impacts the overall workforce, and especially as women begin to return to work and return to the labor force, they may not be able to find the same kind of jobs they had before. It may only be part-time work, but overall it definitely impacts the availability of workers and labor in our workforce. I think as we go forward, the smaller, less diverse labor force is likely to have a big impact over the next 5 to 10 years in the overall productivity and the available labor pools. On the plus side, as you look kind of at the graph at the top left, you'll see what happens with GDP, how it kind of had wild swings back and forth in 2020. We do see some bright spots. I was on a conference call this week with Bank of America and Michelle Meyer talking about their projections for the GDP over this next couple of years. And the average GDP growth that they're predicting is around 5 to 6%. The low end is 3%, the high end is 7%. And you think about 3% GDP growth in any year as the economy expanding, we would take really any day. But with the government stimulus that's out there and the growth, we need to prepare for it now. So as more people are vaccinated, they're going to start spending more money. They're going to be getting that. We think the economy is going to continue to pick up. And at the end of the day, the labor market has been healing, at a pretty impressive rate. And I think we're on pace, to see unemployment come down to probably the low 5s, 5.1, 5.3% at the end of 2021. And that means a significant share of those folks that lost their jobs will be back in the workforce, but there'll be some lingering labor market challenges overall. So we think now is the right time to find that balance as you navigate through, your growth and what's going to happen, and use talent and your talent strategy to capitalize on the talent that you need and really give you as leaders in your organization the freedom to be strategic. Let's, if you want to hit the next slide, when you talk about what's going on around budgets and how people are beginning to plan, we've just seen a lot of organizations that had to let people go or put them on furlough, start to bring them back. We also saw a lot of TA teams that were furloughed that have not come back. And so now we're having customers ask us to help supplement maybe some of their teams just because of the unknown that's going to occur out there. So a lot of TA departments are deeply affected. So the need to build this agile, resilient TA team to help scale back is really critical. And in the same survey where we saw greater than 40% were going to add to their budget, we saw it across the board, really, of all size companies. But if you look at companies that are between 50 and 99 employees, almost 60% of those said they were going to add to their talent budget. And with companies over 100 employees, 57% of those companies said they're going to increase their budgets around talent. So now's a great time to be looking at your strategy and how you apply those dollars. So Arko, I'll flip it back to you.
Thanks, Darren. And, I completely agree when you call yourself a labor data junkie, because those were some pretty interesting statistics. So if I sort of summarize and try to understand, what are those trends that are coming from here? Some of those have, started before COVID and continue over there, and some of those are sort of new trends. So if I look at some of the high skilled roles, there was a big talent demand supply mismatch before COVID. And even with COVID, that hasn't really changed. And if I look at various sort of tech roles, or really those high-end or niche tech roles, the demand supply mismatch still is over there. It's very difficult to find people with those right and difficult skills over there. And then of course healthcare. Of course with COVID, the situation dramatically changed. There's a huge demand over there. So a lot of these industries or job roles, it's very difficult to find. And the dichotomy over there, as Darren mentioned, is the labor market is still not that great. So that's a very interesting dichotomy that we need to keep in mind. And any organization who's hiring, there might be some roles which may be relatively easy to find, but some roles which are still really difficult to find. The second is, as Darren mentioned, a lot of organizations are expecting an increase in their hiring budget, but overall there is still difficult to get those hiring budgets in and hiring dollars in. And at the same time, a lot of organizations are now rebuilding, and they suddenly need to hire a lot of people. That needs to be done, but without enough budget, essentially means TA teams, the talent acquisition teams, now need to do more with relatively less dollars. And employee expectations, is something that has been happening for quite some time, and that hasn't changed. The candidates still expect a very good experience during the entire hiring process. And when they are, joining organizations, they now expect things like location flexibility with all the work from home, situation that has happened with COVID. They're expecting, more of wellness. They are trying to join the organizations with the right culture, with the culture that would match with what they are expecting. So employee expectations continue to be different, continue to evolve. And with all these three together, we see that the entire talent acquisition life cycle is witnessing a paradigm shift in terms of the processes, in terms of the strategies that are used to hire new people, and very importantly, in terms of the technology and digital tools that are being used across the entire talent acquisition, or in fact, in the entire hire to retire life cycle. So Melissa, if you could move to the next slide. So here we'll talk about, we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the situation. Now, what are some of the potential solutions that organizations can use to navigate through the post-pandemic world? So Melissa, if you move to the next slide, there are 5 broad buckets that we have highlighted over here, which can help improve the talent acquisition organization and ultimately benefit the entire enterprise. Number 1 is focus on effective workforce planning and talent strategy creation, and having that overarching right view and overarching solution. Accessing or leveraging more innovative solutions just for the sourcing part of the talent, having the right employer brand and the right employee value proposition, which you want to showcase to your potential candidates, having the right experience and the right efficiency through heavy technology and digital leverage ecosystem. And last but not the least, having an agile, resilient, and future-ready talent acquisition organization, something which is resilient to similar shocks in the future. So in the next few pages, we'll get into the details of these one by one. So first of all, when we say talent strategy, or the overall strategy around talent and talent acquisition, it's a pretty complex element. There are multiple various small buckets that we need to get into over here. So for example, if I talk about just the talent strategy portion, where we are not talking about the human elements, but broader organization level, what do we need to look at? We need to look at what's the demand supply plan, what's the overall business plan, and what's the talent demand supply in all the locations that the company is operating in. What sort of sourcing model do we need to hire the right talent at the right time at the right cost? Location becomes very important, especially in a post-COVID world where global supply chains are being disrupted. People are working from home. So what is the right location model? And last and increasingly in importance is skills taxonomy. What is the level of skills within the organization, and what sort of skills do we need to hire more? So once we have that strategy in place, sort of then moves to how do we treat every individual who's touching the organization? How do I provide them the right experience and acquire those talent? How do I retain them? How do I sort of activate or increase their employee engagement? And of course, the key levers over here are technology, analytics, and productivity and continuous improvement. All of these together helps us achieve the right talent and people strategy. Darren, so you have worked a lot with enterprises in terms of helping their talent acquisition strategy. Anything you wanted to add?
Arko, when I think about, the word strategy, sometimes people get hung up on having to create some kind of corporate board level strategy that becomes a little overwhelming, right? And so when you think about the work we do every day is a lot of tactical work. So what I would just encourage you to do, instead of trying to start out with your strategy, think about some guiding principles around your workforce. So when you begin to marry these two things together around talent acquisition strategy and your people strategy, think about and brainstorm with your team, what are our guiding principles around our workforce? Whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it's top performer analysis to help you understand the mission critical roles in the organization, whether it's your EVPs that you have. And then once you have those guiding principles, use your labor market analytics to help determine where you're going to build that workforce. Are you tied into certain locations because it's manufacturing and production? Are you open to other locations and more remote workforces? That'll tell you what strategies that you're going to use, and then to help you decide what technology you're going to go grab to support those initiatives and how you can measure and improve those. But that continuous improvement and that process agility will enable your organization to really deliver these talent models that are flexible and getting you ready, for the changing business cycles. I think back 10 plus years ago, maybe even 12 years ago, we were talking about how fast the business cycles are changing every 1 to 2 years. And so, when you go back and look at 2020, business cycles are almost changing every quarter to some degree because of the accelerated pace of digital adoption and the way the labor market changes and the economy, quite honestly, changes, in a global way. So I think having these two things together are really important, but don't make it too complicated, right? Think about what are guiding principles. Let's talk about that first, and then that'll help you develop your strategy. Next slide there, Melissa.
Yeah, that's a great point, Darren. Instead of trying to boil the ocean, it makes sense to break it down into easier steps. So Melissa, yeah. So the second point we talked about is better and more innovative sourcing strategies. The world today is pretty different in the sense, there's no one or two places where you can find good talent. Talent is spread out across the globe at a lot of different places. So we need a combination of various strategies and the right sort of proportion of various strategies to be able to source talent. It can be, building the right talent communities, good paid job postings, programmatic advertising, university and community partnerships can, bring in the right talent. Similarly, especially in a post-COVID world, internal mobility becomes very important, right? Talked earlier about the skills taxonomy. So if an organization has the right amount or the right skill mapping within the organization, it can help move those people within the organization to those parts which require the talent more, rather than actually letting people go. So internal mobility is something that we are seeing a lot of organizations focus more, instead of just trying to hire new people from outside. Social media is of course very important, and then related to that is influencer events. And influencer events, the right influencer events can help build the right employer brand and can improve the entire presence on social media and attract new talent. So overall, if I look at all these sourcing channels or innovative methods of sourcing, they bring in multiple benefits, right? They help improve the overall number of people applying to the organization. They help improve the quality of people. It helps in diversity and inclusion as well. In many cases, to really make a diverse organization, it becomes important to try to access those various different sources of talent, which are not the most usual or most common. And some of these methods can help an organization do that. So again, Darren, these are some of the things that you are doing day in and day out in your business with various of number of your clients. You want to highlight on a couple of them?
Well, when you think about focusing on sourcing strategy, you want to leverage the channel that's most effective for each one of your critical job families. And we even create some 4-box grids to help you begin to place those job families around labor market availability, labor pool availability, and then criticality to the organization. That helps you kind of understand where to plug those in from a sourcing strategy standpoint. And then once you begin to integrate all of those, you can begin to think about, okay, these have different channels, but your messaging must be aligned. Kind of to your point, also around your branding and your EVP, right? You want your overall employment brand aligned, but the communication channel aligned to the strategy. So getting them tied together is important. I think that not only does it simplify your external, execution, but also helps you maintain that your key employment value prop messaging as you go along. But it's also a way to communicate internally and to begin to pull in your internal stakeholders into the recruiting process and the talent acquisition process, and then begin to turn them into both advocates as well as ambassadors in the organization. So you think about internal mobility and how that piece comes into, the external talent that you're bringing in. Those all things have to be part of your overall talent strategy. So I think Arko's point, tying the disparate pieces together is really critical. And you can use your EVP to do that, and just understanding where the jobs fall in a criticality standpoint and availability standpoint will help you do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue to the next page, where you're talking about why employer brand is very important. It's important for all candidates and all roles, but especially more important for all those high-skilled roles where there's a big mismatch in terms of the talent demand and supply. For example, some of the tech roles that we talked about. These highly skilled people, they have lots of options, lot of organizations where they can go to. So Melissa, if you can go to the previous page. Yeah. So the question is, for each of these candidates, how do you make your organization the most attractive one to go to? And that is where, as Darren was mentioning, creating the right employee value proposition becomes very important. And there are some interesting nuances to it. An EVP can be for an entire organization, which highlights the entire org culture and why and candidates should join that organization. But within that organization, there are various types of roles. There are tech roles, there are HR roles, there are operational roles, there are leadership roles. And each of these, there needs to be some differences or some nuances to bring out why would a person want to join that role. For example, a bank. Why would a technology person want to join a bank and not a technology company? So there needs to be some specific nuances for each role as well. And that is where, having the right content, putting it out in social media becomes very important. I'll ask, Darren to sort of highlight some of the examples of some interesting work that he has done over here. But talent nurturing becomes very, very important, because the talent within the organization is one of the strongest propagators of the employer, right? So that becomes very important, to ensure that your internal employees the same thing that you are talking about. But Darren, any good examples around social media advertising or?
Yeah, so I'll just give you a couple, Arko. So number one, I think content is king and content reigns. And if you look at let's look at the direction that every streaming service on the planet is going now, whether it's Disney Plus or Netflix. And by the way, just last night I heard that Netflix had received 44 Golden Globe nominations. I think Jimmy Fallon was kind of talking about it in his, that's where I get my news, right? Not a great source of my entertainment news, but he was about Netflix had gotten 44 Golden Globe nominations around the content they had produced, and CBS had gotten one. And so you think about where people are going, and again, everybody been at home the last year and streaming more. Content is king, and that's the same thing with you and your team. Remember, cultivating relevant content drives engagement, and so your social media campaigns and your influences are no longer just part of the recruiting team. That's definitely part of what we do in recruiting. And like Arko said, that outreach is critical to be out in those critical job families, but the content's important. So make friends with your marketing team, become a great partner with them, and highlight some of the great work that they're doing with your consumer brand. And then bridge that gap between the consumer brand and your organization and the employment brand through real stories and testimonies. And as your recruiters gain buy-in with marketing, you begin to gain more business buy-in, and you'll create ambassadors. I keep using that word, right? More ambassadors along the way to help continue to build your EVP out there. Begin to integrate the content that you have. And as an example, I'll just tell you that when I see on LinkedIn, a post from a business operator, whether it's a COO or a VP of operations or a manager that is not in recruiting, I think those posts are the most interesting and get the most response and get the most attention. And they are actually influencers in their own way. And they're going to tell you something about the organization, whether it's the project they're working on and that's critical, or an interesting event that they've attended or are working on. This helps you nurture potential talent by helping them understand what the day in the life really looks like and what is the impact on the business. So when it comes to nurturing potential talent, you got to craft the right content, distribute that content to the right social media channel, and with that, it'll help you build out your talent organization as a magnet for talent and things that are being done that are interesting to the overall talent pool. But again, content is king, and you use the EVP to share that content out there overall. So you move kind of through this continuum that you see on the screen all the way to nurturing the talent that you're going to have, for the future. Arko?
Yeah, that's a great point, Darren. And I think, all of these requires a lot of technology help. And of course, all of us know over here, talent acquisition is one of probably the hottest places where there are a lot of interesting, tech pieces or digital tools that are coming up. So this is just a sort of short list of, where all we see some of the most interesting technology and tools helping in. And these are pretty advanced. They bring in things like cognitive automation, natural language processing, various forms of AI, machine learning. But the overall aim is twofold over here. At one side, it helps to reduce costs and increase efficiency. At the same time, tools and technology helps improve and increase stakeholder experience. In some cases, they might be in conflict, but I strongly believe that with the right set and right ecosystem of tools and technology, you can achieve both. You can both reduce costs as well as significantly enhance the stakeholder experience. So, I won't go into the details of each of these, but two things that I really find important in a post-COVID world are within sourcing. If I look at something like resume parsing and candidate matching, today as organizations start hiring back, going back to normal, a lot of enterprises are facing a situation where there's sudden need for hiring a large number of people. In these situations, having some sort of technology tool to help parse through hundreds or thousands of resumes and maybe giving some sort of candidate fitment scoring and ranking, that really helps improve the speed of the process, because as things go normal and organizations start hiring, speed is of essence. It cannot be delayed in terms of getting your business back on track. Darren, I'm sure you have some other good examples of how technology is helping the entire recruitment process.
Yeah, Arko, when I look at this slide and kind of reflect on it, we could probably do a webinar on each one of these, verticals that are here. So it is complex, and there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of new options that are coming on the market. So these automation tools have really advanced over the last 10 years. A good friend of mine told me very recently that filling a pre-hire assessment during 2019, when there's no candidates to be found, was like trying to sell snow to somebody in upstate New York this past week when they got 3 feet of snow. It was almost impossible to do because they didn't want to knock out any candidates. And so I think that you talk about that balance, right? How do you find that balance between screening and assessing with a limited count supply, and then a positive candidate experience that drives speed and quality of hire at the same time? And so as you think about your next generation of technology investments, you're going to have a great opportunity to utilize AI technology, not just for sourcing, like most of us do today, right? But also for pattern recognition and for cultural fit predictive analysis. And so my encouragement to you is bring in your favorite, industrial organization PhD to help ensure that you're screening and assessing against the behavioral traits and the cultural fit that's going to really drive organizational performance in your company. And we have IOs on our team that help us kind of analyze each unique role and the intended contribution to the organization, of that role. And once we do that, we can then craft things as simple as chatbots and interview guides and screening guides and stack ranking based on qualifications and experience that'll help us increase our, cultural fit as well and increase our quality of hire overall. But I do think that a lot of these things are still pretty early on. And of course, machine learning requires machine learning. That's a genius statement of the day, right? Machine learning has to learn, it has to think through. So the sooner you can get started down that path with your organization, the sooner you're going to reach a point of effectiveness in using the technology overall.
Yeah, that's a great point, Darren. Technology is still being developed, and a lot of these terms, artificial intelligence, machine learning, seem pretty interesting, but not all the tools are really great at it. But then, if I sort of combine all of these, ultimately what organizations are looking for after the COVID shock is, how do I have a relatively risk-free, resilient organization which is able to withstand similar global shocks in the future? And that is where we see a lot of various things coming together, and all of them ultimately contributing to the right or measurable business outcomes and the right talent strategy. For example, talent mix. What sort of people do you need and where do you need them for your organization? As I said, global supply chains are in flux. All organizations are rethinking about where to open the new business, where to have their people in, and how to recruit those people. So talent mix in terms of permanent versus contingent. Whether you want to have an outsourcing model, where do you want to have some sort of crowdsourcing? Do you want to have freelancers? What sort of location should they be based in? What should be your operating model? Is it more sort of outsourcing? Is it more hybrid, or is it mostly insourcing? All these contribute to help design a more resilient organization. And ultimately, all these should contribute to measurable business outcomes. Having the right KPIs within your organization, especially in the talent acquisition function. It is not just about time to hire, but more about talent quality, time to productivity. Those are the measurable business outcomes which will help an organization design a more resilient and risk-free model for the future. Darren,
You know, I like
any comments?
Yeah, I really like this slide that you put together before you go to the next one, because I like that in the center you've got business outcomes, right? So when you start your journey, or whether you're transforming your current organization, you got to start with business outcomes. What's most important, and then kind of work your way backwards to design each of the pieces of the process. And I like to think about Leslie mentioned, who works on our team, is our director of implementation, and we call her the California closets of talent, because she organizes. So she takes the chaos of these multiple processes and brings that together to create efficiency into our teams. And then once you have this efficient, immeasurable process, then you can drive effectiveness, then you can drive operational outcomes, which are going to drive, business results overall. But again, when I look at this slide and have the business in the middle, the business outcomes in the middle, I just think it's really critical that you think about your impact as a talent organization on the business and how you can help the business move forward, and then craft your strategy around that. So I appreciate this slide a lot, Arko.
Yeah, and I think this is also an opportunity for the talent acquisition organization to have a bigger seat at the table for the entire enterprise, right? I mean, talent acquisition today is much more important and closely linked with strategy, and it cannot be a sideshow. It becomes much more important to the entire organizational strategy, and talent acquisition function can get that seat at the table and ensure that they are really closely linked with what business is planning to do. So now if we move to the next slide, this is more of a sort of summary of what we have discussed till now in terms of the various elements of a talent acquisition solution. And the right workforce planning, superior stakeholder experience. And again, when we say stakeholder experience, it means experience for both the candidate as well as the hiring managers. We talked about the right recruitment analytics and how it contributes to workforce planning, the right sourcing strategy, employer branding, selection process, and of course, all of this underpinned through a really robust and well-selected, well-crafted digital and technology ecosystem. So now that we have the key elements that are needed to design the right recruitment or talent acquisition solution, the question is, who can help do that? So Melissa, if you move to the next page, what we have seen is, outsourcing can become an effective solution or effective, pathway to achieve some of these. So if you move to the next page, as we speak to a lot of enterprises, very few organizations have the people, process, and technology capability to manage a scalable and flexible recruitment program, especially in these days, right? A lot of enterprises during COVID had really scaled down their internal talent acquisition functions. And today, suddenly, when they need to hire back, it's very difficult to build up that internal talent acquisition function from scratch. So that flexibility or scalability is not really there. And that is where, if you, Melissa, move to the next point, and that is where we feel that an outsourcing service provider can really bring in that expertise. And the outsourcing service providers are doing this day in and day out. They have the scale to provide that scalability and flexibility to the enterprise and their hiring needs. A lot of them, RPO providers, have the right market data. I mean, we saw Darren right in the beginning being a data junkie. And then, there are so many technology options out there in the market. Enterprises, very few of them have the bandwidth to really sift through hundreds or probably thousands of these technology tools out there and select which is the best out of them. RPO providers have that expertise, and they can bring in this combined solution, which brings in the right expertise, the right domain, and the right technology, and help enterprises build that scalable and flexible recruitment program. So as we move to the next page, the RPO model is not really new, right? It's a pretty stable and well-proven model. So Everest Group data, we closely track the market over here, and our data over the years have showed it's a constantly growing market. 15% plus growth for the last 5 years makes it one of the fastest growing HR services market. And that is testament to the fact that in most cases, the RPO model has worked out really well. And over the years, the service providers in this entire industry have improved their capabilities, have enhanced their value proposition, enhanced the type of offerings that they bring in. And that is where we see more and more organizations adopting RPO continuously. So if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, every year there are more than 500 new RPO deals getting signed. And even if I look at the post-COVID data, which we are still collating, of course, during the first 3 quarters, there was a big slowdown, not a lot of recruitment was happening. But from Q4 onwards, the moment organizations needed to rebuild back and start hiring again, RPO is being seen as one of the most preferred models. A lot of these organizations are again turning back to RPO providers to help them build back their internal organization. So RPO has a lot of benefits, and I'll actually invite Darren to highlight some of these benefits on the next page. You have worked with a lot of enterprises. Why do you think, or what sort of benefits do you think you bring to the clients of yours?
Yeah, thanks, Arko. And kind of to your point, a couple of slides back about having a seat at the table and about business impact. You see that on the right-hand side of this slide. I have probably had more conversations this year in 2020 and 2021 with CHROs talking about how there is a direct line of sight to whatever recruiting activity is going on to the CEO of the organization. Talent has become mission critical. And so we spoke earlier, business impact. We believe that this is a journey that you can help drive, this measurable business impact. And it starts with understanding and aligning with the business. And part of that is having the ability for HR to be more strategic in their approach and really do a great intake to understand what the business needs and what's going on. So once you align with the business, you'll understand, is it top line revenue growth that's important? Is it reducing early turnover? Is it, creating a supporting hiring manager experience along the way? Then you can, create and design an operational model that's going to drive process efficiency, create access to scarce talent by improving your sourcing channels. This is going to allow you to really focus on the top performers and quality of hire and the process that you're going to embark on to attract that talent into your organization. And by utilizing a partner who has the expertise that's kind of broad and deep, you gain access to best-in-class technology, best-in-class process, and allow you to kind of focus on delivering that TA strategy. And, we can focus on delivering that and on the execution, for you. At the end of the day, the variable cost structure will help provide cost reduction opportunities for you. It'll also allow you to reallocate some of your budget from maybe some overhead costs that you have today to more strategically critical investments. So whether it's AI or other types of technology you want to bring in. So in a way, we kind of work backwards, and we start with the end goal in mind of driving business impact and then kind of move our way back. We had a conversation actually this week with a senior VP of HR, and they were just talking about one of the benefits of working, with an organization like ours is that not only do we have access to a broader base of technology, but we also see organizations at different levels of maturity on their journey. And being able to think what happened with them last year or 2 years ago and what worked well and what didn't helps them mitigate their risk on where they are today. Like, well, hey, don't turn left at this juncture. You want to stay to the right, as you're going up the road on that journey. And so that's one of the real benefits of outsourcing, to a provider like ours that has, 200 plus customers, kind of across the globe that we work with at various sizes, various industries. And we intentionally do that because we learn and we like to learn. We learn from them, they learn from us. And so that mutual learning really kind of creates a great partnership as you go down the road.
Yeah, and then probably the last important point is, well, great, outsourcing is a good model, but what sort of things should an enterprise look for when they're outsourcing to a provider? And how do you select the right provider? While of course, there are a lot of things, we decided to highlight 6 of them. I'll spend the most time on the first one, which is the flexibility and scalability, because that has assumed paramount importance in the post-COVID world. Today, no enterprise is really sure how things will pan out in the next few months or probably in the next few quarters. And when we see enterprises coming out with their RFPs, it's pretty flexible. And through the entire, service provider selection journey, the entire requirement changes dramatically because the situation on the ground is changing dramatically. So it's important to select a service provider who's flexible enough to be able to change with those, changing ground situations, right? It's not a stable situation where, if you are planning for, 500 hires over the next 6 months, you're sure that you'll actually hire 500 people over the next 6 months. That can go up to 2,000, that can come down to 100. And accordingly, the solution needs to change. So is the service provider willing, and does the service provider have that culture to be able to be flexible and scalable in that situation? And some of the other very important things are, robust analytics and digital capability. I think we have talked enough about how important a role technology plays in this entire talent acquisition process today. And any provider who has those right analytics, the right set of tools, the right ecosystem, which they are able to bring forward in terms of an integrated solution to the client, that becomes very important. Similarly, having those value-added services and strong domain expertise is very important. So when I say value-added services, things like, we talked about employer branding, employee value proposition, building the right talent communities, ability to support workforce planning. These are getting included more and more in RPO deals. And, the provider should have the right capabilities across all of them. And then when I say domain expertise, domain can be a lot of things. So it can be the right technology domain, it can be the right sort of recruiting domain, but also very important is, having the right sort of industry expertise. Today as skills become more niche and more advanced, every industry, every job role, requires a very different kind of expertise. Really niche tech roles, you need a recruiter who understands those tech lingo and tech jargon. Otherwise, they can't really find the right candidates. So when I combine all of this together, ultimately, enterprises need a provider who's able to work as a strategic partner, right? It's not an arm's length, relationship where, the service provider is just executing some, tasks or processes for you. It's really a sort of combined, holistic sort of situation where both the enterprise and service providers are working with each other closely and supporting each other to ultimately achieve those business objectives. So that sort of mostly brings us to the end of the key things that we wanted to share today. Darren, anything else that you wanted to share? Anything that I may have missed?
Arko, I think just number one, I appreciate you being here today and just helping us kind of walk through how to navigate, the next few, months and years from a talent angle. But one of the last things that you said just kind of, I don't know, threw a light bulb in my head just now when you said, about being a strategic partner, not just being transactional. And, we say that all the time, but I think about HR in general, when you think about the things you're going to outsource, benefits, payroll, some of your wellness activities as well. Those things are pretty transactional and how they're outsourced. I think RPO and recruiting, when it's outsourced, it's actually quite a bit different. And it is a partnership, and it is, a lot of communication that goes on every single day, every single week, every single month that is a little bit different than your outsourced payroll provider. So again, thanks for just throwing that out there and throwing that light bulb on in my head to remember that, and that's how we operate every day. So it is a little bit different of an engagement. So again, just appreciate your time today. Love to take questions if we have some, Melissa, and then we can wrap it up after that.
Sure. We do have a couple. The first one is, can you provide context to workforce planning offerings? Is it a software solution?
Okay, so I'll take it up, and Darren, please feel free to add. So to me, workforce planning is not just a software solution. Software is one of the enablers, but ultimately it's a combination of software, the right processes, a lot of data and analytics, and to me, very importantly, the culture of the organization. So if you really want to have that long-term strategic workforce planning, you need a lot of data, and not just data from the talent acquisition function, but data from throughout the organization. What is the strategic plan of the company for the next sort of 12 to 18 months? Is there some new locations that the company is planning to open business in? Is there some new business units that the company is planning to open? What sort of skill maps, what sort of skills are there already within the organization? So all those data sort of come together to ultimately help predict, what will be the workforce requirements of the future. It just can't be, talent acquisition data. So in that sense, if an organization has that sort of culture where various departments in the organization understand the importance of talent acquisition and recruitment and willing to share that data and bring talent acquisition to the table during their discussions, that ultimately helps in really that strategic long-term workforce planning. And as I said, technology and software is one of the enablers over there. Darren, what do you think?
Again, kind of reflecting on this question, one of my favorite meetings I ever had is when an HR business partner came to me once and said, let's talk about your future headcount needs and your planning. And I'm like, well, I'm in recruiting. No one ever talks to me about that. And, so it was very refreshing to have HR and the business leader, come to me as a business leader of a unit that I was running and go, let's talk about your headcount. Let's talk about your planning. So number one, I just encourage you to go out and find a leader that you have a good relationship with. Find a leader in the organization that has a real well-run piece of the business, right? And start with them and start small and begin to understand what is it that makes that workforce efficient and what drives that workforce. And then take baby steps as far as the data you collect and then begin to build that out. But I do think it's just, it can be overwhelming to think about what the workforce planning means and is and could look like, but you got to start small.
Great. Another question that's come through is, do you think that the change in employee expectations is short-term trend, or will it last even after COVID-19?
I'll take this one, Arko, then you can jump on it.
Interesting question.
As well.
Sure.
So I was just going to say that I think that, when you know what employees most want, things like competitive pay and security and meaningful work, safety and recognition and those things, those don't really change. I think depending on the job family and someone's skill set, the priorities might shift and what's most important of those things may now shift. So those that have been furloughed or even unemployed, they're going to be looking for more security. And how does my next role, impact the organization overall, and how secure will that job really be, right? But someone who's been impacted by COVID, either through an illness or a family member, who's been ill or impacted by COVID, they're going to look for safety in the workplace. And so, their expectations around those things that we know they want the most don't change, but I think it's probably weighted a little bit, differently. I think there's a slight pause in the ability to go out and grab a lot more competitive compensation, when you look at the wage inflation that did not occur last year, but that will change as the limited labor supply, is going to shift. And I just think, and Arko, you can maybe talk to this as well, the expectations on the short term, around the speed of which, you interact and get, recruited. And that likely will continue. The expectation is that becomes quicker and quicker along the way. Arko?
Yeah, I completely agree. And, if I look at, the broader world and not just from a talent acquisition angle, this entire consumer expectations or customer expectations and the experience that they expect is dramatically changing, right? And that is not something that is reversible. Candidates today expect the same experience in the recruitment process as they experience when they are accessing Amazon, or when they're accessing Netflix, or when they're accessing Uber. The expectation of experience is same as a candidate and as a consumer. And as we move forward, these concepts around hyper personalization is coming in, and I think those will start. That's already very applicable on, say, something like Amazon, but we see them becoming more applicable on the recruitment side as well. When you're approaching a candidate, you really need to personalize the experience, and organizations which do that will be able to hire the more talented and the better quality candidates. So yeah, the short answer is it's definitely not a short-term trend. It's a long-term trend, and probably only going to accelerate further.
So same-day delivery is what you're saying coming up.
Yeah, probably not same day, but yeah, not very far from that.
Right.
So I think we have time for one more question, and one on the list is, what are some of the clearest examples of business impact delivered by outsourcing a talent acquisition function?
Great question. So I think we sort of highlighted some of these before, but in a post-COVID world, the single biggest benefit that I have seen is agility and flexibility. A lot of organizations had completely downsized or even eliminated their internal hiring departments. And suddenly when the economy opened up, they needed to hire back a large number of people. And they found it completely impossible to do it on their own. There's no way they could have done it on their own. And the only solution was going to an RPO provider. And the RPO provider did it really, really well. So I think that is one of the clearest examples. But other than that, when an RPO provider helps build that employer value proposition or creates those talent communities, the ability to attract a larger and better number of candidates, that improves dramatically. And last but not the least, I'll say, diversity and inclusion is a big benefit that we are seeing from talent acquisition or RPO, because finding a lot of these diverse talent through usual channels is very, very difficult. And if an organization is really interested in getting that diverse talent, the expertise that an RPO provider brings in terms of really knowing which are those nooks and corners of the world and internet where to find them, that is a really, really big expertise to bring.
Yeah, I think the only one I would add to that is some things when you think about reduced turnover and increased productivity. And if you have the ability to measure that, reduced turnover is one of the easier ones to measure from a business impact standpoint. And we've had multiple engagements where we've gone in and where there was, pretty outrageous turnover, been able with the quality of hire program, reduce that turnover. And that's one of the things, you're proud of. The things that Arko mentioned around, the employment brand and diversity and inclusion, those kind of initiatives impact that reduced turnover. So putting all those things together really is how you provide business impact long and short term.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. So Arko and Darren, thank you for your time, as well as these very informative insights. We want to thank everybody who attended today's webinar. And again, we will provide a recorded version via email. And with that, we hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.